Want to welcome all of you here this morning. This is our last lecture of the academic year, and it's our pleasure to have presenting to us this morning Dr. Howard Ebert, Associate Professor of Religious Studies. Howard came back to his alma mater to begin teaching here in 1987. He also serves the college as director of both our Master of Liberal Studies and our Master of Theological Studies. Howard's a systematic theologian, but also many of us know him as a friend, as someone who builds up community, and as an enduring believer in the goodness that this place can hold. One of Howard's favorite classes among students is Providence, Suffering, and Freedom, where they can explore together some of the most difficult themes of a believer's life. And so we turn to Howard, noting that while you do have the freedom to make us suffer this morning, we'll trust you'll see this as a providential opportunity to do good. With that, I'll turn things over to our friend Howard Ebert.
Thank you, Julie. I'm not sure if I should forgive you or thank you. Well, the opportunity to give the last lecture to this community is truly daunting. Daunting for many reasons, given the quality and caliber of previous lecturers, given the quality of the audience, and not least of all, we work and live together. And so when this is over, and if it's a bomb, I can't fly home, right? First, when I told my daughter this, she said, well, it's your last lecture, so you can die. Seriously, it is also daunting because St. Norbert College has been such a key part of my formation. I graduated here in 1974, majored in philosophy and sociology. As I tell my students, I was here many, many buildings ago. And I really do, I vividly remember sitting in Boyle 203 in the fall of 1970, Intro to Philosophy. And I had Dr. Bob Vandenbert as a professor. And I was overwhelmed by college pretty well, but three of us sat in the front row. And I remember as we got into the course asking about, are human beings free? Is there a God? What happens after death? I felt like an eagle kind of soaring. I just loved it. I have almost all my philosophy requirements done by my sophomore year. Bob was my advisor, and so he just funneled me to all the philosophy classes. At the same time, it is here that I really started to find my own voice. I remember sitting in that front row of that classroom, and I was very shy, very timid. You may not believe that, but I was very shy and very timid. And I loved philosophy, so I did pretty well in it. And I remember Bob, this was toward the end of the semester, and I would never contribute in class discussions because there were a bunch of seniors and people in the back of me, and I was, again, pretty frightened by it all. And one day, and I remember this again so vividly, is he said, well, Howard, you look like you have a profound thought. Why don't you share it with the class? And the rest is history. I've been talking ever since. And of course, as Julie mentioned, since 1987, St. Norbert has been the environment where I have worked. And so if my calculations are right, I've spent over half my life here at St. Norbert College. Of course, this week we remember very fondly of Bill Bonet, who spent a good part over the vast majority of his life here at St. Norbert College. But longevity is only part of the picture. The support, encouragement, the challenge, and friendship that I have experienced here defies description. Words simply cannot express the deep sense of joy, gratitude I feel for this place. The community and members of it have been at every significant moment in my life over the last 4.5 decades. From our wedding, to the baptisms of our 3 daughters, through the health scares with our youngest daughter when we thought she may have cancer, to the funeral of my parents, to the funeral of my wife's parents. This community has been a constant companion and a source of strength and support. And for all of this, I can only say thank you. Now, at this point, I was going to say that you have made me who I am today. But one of my daughters perceptively said, Dad, they may not want to take responsibility for that. So I deleted it, but I got it in anyway. See, there's ways here. So as I pondered what topic should be my last lecture, I asked myself, what is the most important lesson, advice, guidance could I give as my final contribution to this academic community? My response to this question has varied from not much. I could write everything I wanted to say on the back of a postage stamp, and I was hoping there'd be a lot of refreshments at the outside after this. Two, I hope they brought their lunches, because man, do I have lots to say. I think I've been in between there somewhere, so. But the other interesting thing about reflecting on this question was how I came to realize how much I dislike endings. I am really big on beginnings. I like the beginning of life. I like the beginning of books. Some of you have been up to my office. I have tons of them. People say, have you read them all? And I always say, well, I've read the introductions to them all. I love signing up for races. I love beginning training for races. But endings and finishing, not so much. I'm not a good finisher. And if Patty was here, she would say that, and that's why I told her not to come. So, because she wanted equal time, and I thought that wasn't fair. So this prospect of the last lecture, to be honest, has really freaked me out. So as I was facing, it really has, facing my dislike, my anxiety, my fear of endings, has prompted me to think more seriously about why are endings so difficult for me? Is it a character flaw? Yes, it is. I'm a procrastinator. There's a chuckle here. Everybody who's worked with me is saying, but I think there's something deeper, and it has something to do with how I view life and its purpose and ultimately what life means. I realized that these questions, the very questions that were posed in Boyle 203 in fall of 1970 with some vigor and excitement on my part, would be the focus of this last lecture. So I would like to share with you my experience of living with the questions. So the title of my last lecture is, thought there should be music or something, but is Living with the Questions. The subtitle, though, is Living into the Mystery. And maybe that subtitle tips my hand a little bit where all this is headed. One caveat, and by the way, my introductions are always the longest part of any course I teach. I recognize that my experience is deeply shaped and formed from my social, cultural, religious, and economic location. I'm a white, upper middle-aged male. I grew up not far from here in Brillion, Wisconsin. My dad worked at the Brillion Iron Works. My mom was a stay-at-home parent until my dad was diagnosed with TB, and he went to a sanitarium for a year, and so then she started to have to work at a grocery store. I'm the youngest of 3 children. I'm the only one that attended college in our family. I have a sister and a brother. I'm married to Patty, and we have 3 daughters, and live in a pretty typical middle-class existence. I recognize that my experience then brings with it many privileges, and I also would say responsibilities. And also, my reflections are done out of the Catholic Christian tradition. This tradition, though I have several disagreements and difficulties with it, has shaped me and serves as my interpretive lens. I went to minor seminary right out of 8th grade. I was at Sacred Heart, and I wanted to do it. In fact, I only found later how hard that was for my parents to see their youngest child go off to the seminary. Seminary, not cemetery. Once again, my daughters, well, never mind. Notice they're not here either. So as I say that, though, I do recognize that other faiths and other faith traditions provide interpretive keys and inspiration. And so when I talk out of this tradition, I'm not making any kind of exclusive claims. So, as I mentioned, it was here that I first asked some of the most basic questions in a sustained and critical way. Why are we alive? Why do we die? Is there something more? Is there a God? I remember distinctly wanting answers, and wanting black and white answers. I remember standing in the stairwell of Boyle Hall with Bob Vandenberg. And Bob, of course, my philosophy teacher, I said, Bob, I need to know if there is a God. And he said, why? I said, well, I'm in the seminary, Bob. and his answer was, well, don't worry about it. I thought, Bob. Anyway, But I wanted answers. I wanted answers that were logical, clear and distinct. I finally call this my Descartes stage. I wanted clear and distinct ideas. But as time passed on, I came to realize that these questions were not the kind of questions that could be answered clearly or could be answered once and for all. I came to understand that these questions would accompany me throughout life, and they would be questions and realities that I could not control. It is during this time that I read works by Gabriel Marcel and others that use the word mystery to express a reality that is beyond us and yet surrounds us. So now mystery is not a detective novel. I'm not using it that way, and it's not a problem yet to be solved, but rather it's something that's always beyond our control and always beyond our understanding. I know that mystery can sound terribly vague, abstract, heady, but as I said, Marcel contrasted the notion of mystery with problem. Problems are things you solve and move on. Mysteries you grow more deeply into. And I remember one idea, or I should say one moment, when this idea of mystery really became a reality for me. It was one of those moments I remember vividly. So my students in theological foundations, this is a depth experience. Just had to throw it in there. It was the fall of 1984. 1984, those of you who weren't alive, many of you weren't, it was a great year in many ways not. But 1984 was a particularly exciting and challenging time for me. Patty and I had decided that I would return to graduate school to get a doctorate in theology. I taught high school and junior high for quite a few years. I'd been accepted at Emory in Atlanta, but then my mother was diagnosed with a particular virulent form of cancer. She was relatively young, 66, and she died in the fall of 1984 after a really intense and painful time of dealing with cancer. It was during that time that I received a card from a former high school teacher. And the card simply said, "Please know that you are in my thoughts and prayers as you enter more deeply into the mystery of life and death." Please know that you are in my thoughts and prayers as you enter more deeply into the mystery of life and death. That note didn't, like so many others, say, well, things will get better, brighter days are ahead, she's in a better place. Again, all well-intentioned and sanguine. That statement has opened a door for me, not suddenly, but gradually through the years, to see that the questions I was asking and seeking clarity, certitude, and wanted to answer once and for all and get done with it, no longer did I see the world in black and white terms, but rather more gray, more as a haze, more as a fog that one moves more deeply into. It was also this time that in grad school I had a prof say that at one time he had thought God was in the answers, and now he came to recognize that God was in the questions. It was also in the fall of 1984 that I entered the doctoral program at Marquette and started to read Karl Rahner. You knew he was coming. And by the way, I'd been exposed to Rahner's writings before, and I found him really difficult, weird, bizarre, and yet something changed. And as I read him, I became more and more convinced that he was onto something. And Rahner was emphatic that the church too often domesticated God, and that we must really retrieve and regain a sense of the utter mystery of God. In his essays, interviews, he argued vigorously that we must be much more imaginative, persistent in recognizing how the word God functions in the world. It's not another noun. We don't have a paper, a mic, picture, God. That those other nouns point to concrete objects, but God always points beyond itself to something more, to something else, kind of like the finger pointing to the moon. And so he struggled with words to express this mystery. He would say that God is the infinite mystery, absolute future, infinite horizon. And he likened all of us to children playing on a seashore, taken in by the construction of our little sandcastle and failing to recognize that we are surrounded by an infinite mystery, the infinite mystery of God and love. Rahner was equally emphatic that this mystery, this radical otherness, had drawn intimately close to us, to every human being. Our humanity is saturated with the mystery of God. That every human being has experienced God. That when we think, we ask questions, we love, we are empowered to do these things by God. God is to our abilities to think and love and act freely as light is to sight. God is like gravity. So what is sacred is a child asking questions. It is a love between two lovers. It is the opening of the door for someone. It is acknowledging someone's presence. What appears to be ordinary is extraordinary. Ronner would write, the human person is a question for which there is no answer, because we open up into the infinite mystery of God. And his lovely, lovely line, when two human beings kiss, it is a kiss of two eternities. So we are all mysteries. You know, I try to remind myself that when I'm in Lambeau Field, surrounded by 70,000 people, and I look around and think, they're not mysteries, they're problems. They took my parking spot. They're going to be at the restroom when I'm there. They're going to be blocking my view. And so it's interesting, how do we keep alive that sense of mystery that each of us is a mystery. As we look into each other, there's a mystery to each of us. Ronner's understanding emphasizes that we become more human, more loving, more free, more inquisitive, more curious, more alive as we grow into the mystery of God. So the arguments between theology and science, he would say, are terribly misguided. I love it. He says, God is not a vampire that sucks life out of us, but rather a reality that empowers us. Ronner, in contrast to the masters of suspicion, students, Feuerbach, Freud, Marx, and Nietzsche, argues that if we were purely material beings, we would not be able to break out of our self-centeredness, our egoism, our narcissistic obsessions, and our specificity. God is the enabling ground for us to step back from ourselves, to reflect and decide who we are. We are not totally driven or completely determined by our genes or by our environment. This understanding that divinity and humanity are not opposed to each other, and we're not involved in a zero-sum game, helped me to make some sense, I have this in italics, some sense of the Christian claim that God becomes a person in Jesus of Nazareth. That God could become a human being at a particular time, in a particular place, is called the scandal particularity. By the way, it's a terrible marketing method. God should have waited till there was mass media. God should have, come on, God. I'll come back to being God later. It makes no sense. And so it is a scandal. Why, in a particular time, in a particular place, in a particular person, God becomes a human being? In a wonderful book by James Martin entitled Jesus, a Pilgrimage, he talks about the young Jesus and what Jesus must have experienced, the open latrines of his village, the death of infants, the rubbish, the sounds, the sounds and smells that you and I experience. To take Jesus seriously is to recognize finitude. Being limited is not an obstacle or barrier to the divine, but the necessary conduit to a necessary meeting place with the divine. I want to read that one more time. To take Jesus seriously is to recognize our limitedness as not an obstacle or barrier to the divine, but the necessary conduit to and the necessary meeting place with the divine. By the way, that is really easy for me to read. I have found it near impossible to embrace. I hate finitude. I have spent a good part of my life rejecting, denying my finitude, my limitedness. I've always wanted to be someone else, something else, right? Back in high school, I spent countless hours practicing basketball because I wanted to be the star center. Well, then I changed my dreams to wanting to be the forward. And then I thought maybe I could be a guard. And then I just wanted to make the team. Well, I didn't do any of those. But then did I spend the time, when I think of the many, 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 many nights that I was going to be a basketball, and I didn't want to recognize my limitations. I'm not very coordinated. I won't list them all. You can see my daughters for that list. But anyway, and this is extended to parenting and recognizing limits, to embracing disease, to embracing aging, to befriending death. This resistance of finitude has come home to me loud and strong 2 nights ago. one of our daughters is looking at various graduate schools, and she was talking to her mom upstairs, because they don't talk to me a lot, but no, that's another lecture. But anyway, she was talking, and I heard her say really loud, "But Mom, I want it all." Because she has some really nice offers on the table. And I thought, that's right. I want it all. It's not surprising that many theologians maintain that two of the most serious obstacles to being receptive to the mystery of God is our resistance to acknowledging our finitude and sin, both individual and social sin. I'm thirsty, and that's a limitation. More and more, this incomprehensible mystery, revealing and drawing close in the person of Jesus, continues to challenge, inspire, and dumbfound me, and give me some guidance on how to form my own response and receptivity to this mystery that beckons us constantly. Here I just want to use three quick examples. One is learning in and from the most unexpected places and people. I have a list of people who I go to. I expect to hear wise things and interesting insights, and sadly I have a list of people who I don't think I will get that from. And the following parable, and I thank Nathan Mitchell here, a liturgist, for his interpretation of this parable, really helped me to see, one, that we should expect God's grace to be popping up all over the place in the most unexpected places, but also that Jesus had to learn the same lesson. And sometimes I think, we put Jesus in some kind of stratosphere that doesn't connect with us. But the story I'm talking about is in Mark and Matthew. It's about the Syrophoenician woman who comes to Jesus asking help for her daughter, like any good mom would do. Now, as scholars note, this story is potentially explosive, even scandalous, because the woman is doubly marginal. First of all, she is a woman in a man's world. Second, she's a Gentile who devout Jews would avoid as unclean. So she had double problems in the Jewish mindset. In other words, both the woman's religion and her ethnicity were suspect in Jesus' world. But she comes and she prays, but her prayers are not those of the Jewish scripture and liturgy. Her prayer is a prayer of desperation. Her prayer is her body and her boldness. Her prayer is her daughter's need. At first, Jesus is put off by her otherness, her difference. So here, Jesus is put off by someone who is different, like you and I. And so listen to what Jesus says. Jesus says, it isn't right to take the children's food, the gifts that God has given the Jewish people, and throw them to the dogs. Quicker than lightning, though, the woman picks up Jesus' image and turns it to her own advantage. She says, well, right. But she says, don't even puppies under the table eat children's crumbs? Jesus appears to be stunned. And even more shocking still, he lets himself be changed by this pagan woman's attitude. Indeed, by the stories, and both Jesus and the woman are changed by the encounter. Neither converts to the other religion. Jesus remains a Jew. The woman remains a Gentile. But each of them enters more deeply into the mystery of God, a mystery that embraces all persons. And so the woman's faith, it's real faith, even if it isn't Jewish faith, leaves Jesus awestruck, and he says, woman, your faith is great. Let it be done to you as you wish. The last two instances I'd like to highlight are those that focus on suffering and evil. Where is this infinite mystery present in the immense suffering of humanity and of this planet? How does Jesus concretize our understanding of God, suffering, evil, freedom, and God's will? I'm afraid that sadly for many of us, we have it all figured out, or at least we've been handed answers of why Jesus had to die such a humiliating, horrendous death. Adam and Eve sinned, the fall occurred, Jesus had to come and die on the cross. Such a quick and somewhat compelling response is short. You could put it on a bumper sticker. Paradise, fall, redemption. It makes for a nice long bumper sticker. But yet the answer can preempt serious consideration and questions and can prematurely stifle creative and imaginative and inspiring responses. Today, there is much debate in students in Providence Suffering and Freedom. By the way, that's an excellent course taught by an excellent professor. Thank you. I had to slide it or something. That there's a debate and discussion around the question of the presence of God on Good Friday. Did God require Jesus to die on the cross? Was God in God's very self helpless as Jesus hung on the cross? Or even more provocatively, as Edward Skillebecks, a Catholic theologian, says, are we saved not because of the cross, but despite the cross? As you can imagine, there is much talk and debate there. And I think it has implications for how we deal with our own suffering and evil in the world. But at this Easter season, I think it might be valuable to turn our attention to the accounts of the resurrected Christ. What intrigues me here is the portrayal of the resurrected body of Christ. The resurrected body bears the marks of his crucifixion. Now, if I were God, and by the way, this is a game I like to play. If I were God, I would not, absolutely not, no way, no how, have Jesus keep those scars. I'd have a plastic surgeon come out. I'm God, I guess I could do it other ways. But I would remove those scars. Because remember, those scars were given, and they're reminders of pain, of torture, of abuse, of hatred, of ridicule. I mean, that's what those scars are. And yet they remain in the risen body of Christ. And Ronner argues they remain eternally in the body of Christ. Yet, are these scars, these disfigurements, not transformed by the powerful and transformative love of God? But how is this possible? And doesn't it stretch the very limits of our imaginations? Isn't even such a thought trivializing to the suffering and evil in the world? Is it repulsive? Is it wishful thinking? Is it transformative? Is it sheer nonsense? There's something there that I return back to again and again, because somehow, maybe in our own woundedness, in our own losses, there is transformation and redemption. Equally provocative is how the risen Christ comes to terms with acceptance of his own wounds. Again, I attribute this to Bob Schreider. It's one of those things that when he said, I thought, oh my God, why didn't I ever see it? Because I've read these stories numerous times. But if you look in John's gospel, the resurrected body of Christ, after the resurrection, Jesus meets Mary in the garden. And when she comes close to Jesus, Jesus says, do not touch me. Or in another do not hold on to me. In other words, I have these scars, I have these wounds, stay away. The next, he appears to followers, and at this point, he shows them his wounds. He shows them. And then finally, he appears to Thomas and has Thomas put his hands into the wounds. Bob Schreider, as I mentioned, theologian at CTU, has done work in reconciliation in numerous strife-torn areas, including South Africa, Bosnia, Rwanda. And he states he sees this same pattern in reconciliation. Shame and denial. Don't touch me. I want to be alone. No, I'm not wounded. To acceptance. Here's my wounds. To a sharing of one's secrets and vulnerabilities, and a building of community. So I guess the question this story raises for me, how does this story reflect our own lives and our own secrets and our own vulnerabilities? And how have we come to terms with them? Maybe that's language a problem. Or how have we moved more deeply into them? Recently, I attended an evening, Take Back the Night, where students shared stories of their hurt, their discrimination, their oppression for a variety of reasons on this campus. That evening for me was a powerful reenactment of the death and resurrection of Jesus. In fact, I felt as I heard those stories how people were hurt because of sexual orientation, because of ethnicity, because of economic status, because of looks, and the list goes on. I thought I was actually at the Stations of the Cross. And it's interesting because after each of the stories, the members of the community stood in silence. No applause, no clapping, stood in silence and then sat down again. For me, the community standing in silence was an affirmation of the pain that had just been communicated. And that standing also, to me, I think was a symbol of hope. That somehow, some way, these stories and these hurts can be healed. For me, these stories invite, in fact, urge all of us to think more deeply the questions and the stories that we have been told and about the mystery of God. Here again, I think the Christian testimony regarding Jesus helps us not to turn mystery into some amorphous, idealized nicety that wants us to be comfortable and happy. I'm all for comfort and happy, but it reaches out to us, always respecting our freedom and demanding a response. I guess in Christian circles they call it faith. And without that response, mystery, like the tree that falls in the woods, goes unacknowledged. So how do we cultivate a sense of mystery? How do we as a community continue to cultivate in ourselves and in each other a sense of mystery? I have to be honest. Remember what I said I don't like endings? Notice why I waited until the last minute to write my ending in scribbles? Because this lecture ends kind of like my classes do. We run out of time. So, and it is. Somehow I felt, as I thought about that, I have a feeling that's the way this life is going to end. Kind of, oops, we just ran out of time. Like I said, I'm not big on endings. And I was going to offer some truism and advice about how we can keep this mystery alive, but I think this community has taught me that in so many ways. And so just keep doing what we've been doing and improving upon it. But I will end with an author, Anne Lamott. She's a kind of favorite author of mine, and I think her title says it all, of a recent book, What to Do in the Face of Mystery, Mystery of God. And it's entitled, Help, Thanks, and Wow. The three essential prayers. Thank you very much.